Okay, hello everybody. We're just gonna give you guys a couple more minutes. Thank you so much for joining, and for anybody that's joining late, we're just gonna be here for a minute. Okay, it's been a couple of minutes. Let's start the meeting, and I want to start off by saying thank you and welcome everybody to our IHL Youth Action Campaign info meeting. My name is Alina Abraham, and today we have guest speaker Miss Ann Sadipo.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. I'm excited for our IHL meeting.
And hi everyone, I'm Sonia Prabhakar, and this is presented by AAI Red Cross along with AAI HOSA, and this program is affiliated with American Red Cross. So let's start off with the background of the actual law. The International Humanitarian Law is also known as the Law of Armed Conflict or the Law of War. IHL is a set of rules which seek for humanitarian reasons to limit the effects of armed conflict. Essentially, it limits the means and methods of warfare, but it also limits the suffering caused by war. And it's made up of two other laws, which are the International Treaty Law and the Customary International Law.
So, as for the background and the history of IHL, it all started in the 1800s when Red Cross and IHL decided to come together and collaborate. This is a way for the Red Cross to fulfill its mandate and save more lives. And through all of the wars that have happened throughout history, there was an extreme expansion, hence why it's called international humanitarian law. And this happened not only throughout the 1800s, but all the way up until now, hence the reason why it went from human rights and refugee laws all the way to current internet laws and internet warfare. All the laws from the past and now still contribute and still play a role into having that civility, because even war has rules, as IHL really puts out there. It really promotes that level of humanity and civility throughout war, how there may be destruction and disputes, but there still needs to be peace within the center of it all, which is what IHL again truly promotes, whether that's with rules such as not holding hospitals and businesses and other organizations for ransom. That's just one of the many examples regarding the implementations of IHL. And we will further on be going towards the theme of this year's campaign later on in the presentation.
So, this event is called the International Humanitarian Law Youth Action Campaign, also called the IHL Campaign. It's a program offered by the American Red Cross, and it encourages the youth, specifically ages 13 to 24, to go out and campaign either virtually or in person. So, first, you would learn about the actual law through a mandatory training from a certified IHL trainer, and you would also learn how to build a successful campaign. After learning, you form teams and create peer to peer campaigns. Through this, you will get a chance to earn volunteer hours, which you can plug into your Red Cross Volunteer Connection, a community service credit. You could get the chance to experience an international team, and you would get the chance to visit Washington, D.C. on a fully funded trip. The theme for this year is cultural preservation.
Now, if you're revved up and interested in IHL, let me tell you about the timeline for this. We recommend you start in March because with this campaign that you're making, the beginning portion of it is not the actual start, but the training in itself. You have to do a mandatory ARC training for all the teams and then implement that information into your campaign. So that's why we really suggest beginning in March. And so you could fill out the interest form, of which will show up later on in the presentation now, formulate your team, and then get started there. And our deadline for our chapter is April 8th, 2022. We will not be accepting any later submissions. That way you have that time period to make any posts, create any games, and then put all of those things together. By the end of April, the best campaign will be chosen by IHL scholars. Whoever wins nationally gets to go to Washington. Results for that come out in May. And so then once those results come out in July is when you will be going to the national competition in Washington in July. And so what does that entail? You would be presenting to judges in DC, you'd be going to the Senate or the House of Representatives, and this essentially by going to this event we'll be giving background in the marketing and the project management of Red Cross and IHL. You'd be seeing guest speakers. You get to hear what other teams did, all nationally. And as for the logistics of this specific event in Washington, all that information will be released later on in the future. It's to be determined at the moment. For example, we currently don't know whether or not it will be virtual or in person. So once statistics are shown for the future, then we will be able to give that info.
So, some campaign ideas that you guys could do are movie nights, where you tie your movie representation back to the theme, which is cultural preservation. And you could do this through Zoom or Netflix or any other way you could make a movie. You could do a virtual session where it can be anything related to the theme. So, make sure anything you do ties back to the theme, for example, an interactive game. You could do a card game where each card is a cultural monument, and this ties back to the theme of cultural preservation. You could also make an Instagram account specifically for your campaign, and you could make posts on cultural preservation. A lot of people use Instagram, so this is also a great way. These are just examples of what all you could do. They're not required. You could do anything as long as you're campaigning for cultural preservation.
Now, speaking of cultural preservation and that being the theme, that also has a lot of variety within it. Cultural preservation can mean a lot of things. For example, there's natural phenomenons and sites that could be seen if there was a war and certain indigenous people decided to preserve that piece of their culture. That right there is cultural preservation. It's the protection of language or art or anything that has been produced by said culture. An example would be the Monuments Men or the French Resistance, and how in certain wars and Nazi soldiers would come and obliterate certain cultures, but then they still kept ties to that and tried to keep that within themselves and their background. That is cultural preservation, and that has happened all throughout history, and you can just choose one of the many. Again, as long as it goes and ties with cultural preservation and all of the ideas that Sonia's just listed, you can do all those games, but remember it always has to tie back with that theme that you've chosen within cultural preservation.
If you guys have any questions, feel free to contact me, Alina, or Miss Odipo. I've listed Miss Odipo's email down below as ann.sodipo@redcross.org. If you have any questions regarding the IHL campaign, please feel free to type them in the chat box now.
So we have a question down below. Ms. Sadipo, if you want to answer that.
Sure. The question is how many people can be on a team? And also, is there an IHL website with guidelines and more information? There is, and that's part of the training, that second part. So if you do decide to form a team, which kind of ranges in size, I would recommend anywhere from 4 to 13 students. I think you could probably do more, but I would keep it relatively small, just so that your group has the opportunity to come together and create ideas, and everyone has a chance to develop something. Um, but the guidelines are in the training as well as resources. And then how many teams will be chosen to go to DC? Normally, it's selected by the state. We pick the top couple of teams, and then we submit them to nationals. Um, I don't know if it's going to be one or two. It just depends on what kind of results we see this year. And we can kind of make a case and see if we can push more than one team to go. But we definitely want to see as many teams as possible. And creativity is going to be really, really important. Thinking outside the box, um, reformulating the box and what it consists of is going to be helpful too. If you ever need any questions, or you have any questions, or you need any assistance, I will be a resource, as well as the national team in DC. So please don't hesitate to contact me. Are there any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
So, for the actual opportunity in DC, how many days would the candidates or contestants be in DC, and what is your personal experience in Washington?
So I'm actually relatively new to the American Red Cross, and so this competition, I've heard about it. I've seen some of the videos that they've done previously when they have a annual campaign on the what is it, the day of Star Wars Day. And so they kind of talk about how Star Wars and IHL, and how it would be different if they actually observed IHL. And we have presentations on how the Avengers and Marvel connects to IHL. And there's a series on Harry Potter and IHL. So I'm familiar with the group that's leading this endeavor. They're an amazing group of scholars and professionals. But my experience with IHL has mostly been in humanitarian organizations, so working in refugee camps and doing research for organizations such as the UN and National Human Rights Organization. So a little bit different, but it still ties into this concept. And I think you guys are really awesome and lucky and brave to take this on. But I think it's going to be a really beautiful project, and it can lead to lots of interesting things in the future.
Wow. Well, if you didn't know, we go to Alliance Academy for Innovation, and the theme, or not the theme, the mascot, or would be the Avengers. So
Appropriate.
appropriate. That works out. That's interesting to see the variety in themes that could come up from these campaigns.
Absolutely. A lot of cool things can come up, and I'm excited to see what teams come up with. And like I said, if you guys ever have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me.
Yep, and if you guys have any more questions, as she said, you can contact her or me or Sonia. So if you do, don't hesitate.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yep, thank you for being here. We greatly appreciate that. And thank you everybody else for joining us virtually. And if you are interested in participating, I know after this meeting I am, then scan this QR code. And after participating or sending that interest, we will contact you and try to have your team ready by then. So we have another question. For the initial competition, would we be presenting or just submitting?
So it's the presentation essentially is your submission. So it's a presentation of all the activities that you've done, an assessment on how well it worked, and a discussion on your planning procedures, some of the struggles you might have had, reassessments, reevaluations. It's a very honest, frank presentation, and that becomes your formal submission. It can be done either through pictures, slideshows, a video, whatever format you guys decide to create to facilitate that presentation. Interviews tends to be helpful as well. As I said, when you go through the training, it'll give you some examples of some previous submissions. we've seen some really creative things, like people have re-edited some music and have come up with a montage in the background to go along with their theme. So a lot thinking outside the box, like I said, is going to be really helpful. And I think that might be the last question.
Okay, well, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.